our family and close friends and contacts.
And that is important because there's two factors here actually. One, you can reconnect with your family in some ways, and we can use Zoom at the moment, and that's and this situation. You've also got to look at where the opportunities lie, and more families are getting closer. They get to spend time together. It depends what they do in that time. Now, I mean, my family, my wife and my daughter, we've taken to actually doing quizzes on the YouTube channel. I think it's a Jimmy Carr one we were doing last night. Not a big fan of Jimmy Carr, but actually the quiz is actually quite good, and it actually engages the whole family. So we're not.
Do you enjoy it? Do you enjoy
Yes,
it?
yes, we do. Yes, we do, and it actually makes you think. It makes your brain tick as well because you're using your brain to actually have to think of the answers. So you're also exercising your brain in some way.
Rather than watching box sets with
That's correct.
popcorn and takeaway pizza.
Yes, well, we don't do that anyway. But I mean, look, we've watched a couple of movies, but I also took this time that I actually wanted to read a little bit more because I keep buying books. So we've got a lot of shelfware, shelf help, I suppose, as opposed to in terms of the books I bought, and I actually haven't had an opportunity to read them. So I'm looking to take advantage of that. Decluttering the house as well as another one. You declutter your house, you start decluttering your life as well.
That's right.
Things where I didn't actually have time before because I was constantly out. Now I'm actually looking to actually get, it was one thing that there's a clinical psychologist we've talked about in the past, Jordan Peterson, who says is one of his 12 rules of life, which is an anecdote to chaos, I think it was called, the book. And he talks about getting your house in order. You've got to get your house in order before you actually tell other people to get how to live. So,
correct.
So
and of course we don't do that normally, do we? Because we're too busy working to live.
That's correct. But the flip side of that, on the where families can actually learn to bond again and family values get realised. The other side is that domestic violence has increased significantly because partners who have actually been away, who spend most of the time away from each other, are now forced to spend time together, which means they it's like a pressure cooker, so they're not actually getting on, and it's actually got worse. Plus, we were talking about yesterday how alcohol has increased as well, so so that could be a factor. But how would you combat something like that, Theo? And I know we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, but if you are struggling with a partner who's at home, how would you be able to handle? How should they be able to handle that? I'm talking about compromise and communication, but you have a very good, well, not even theory, probably experience in this.
Well, don't forget there's two factors here. There's the macro and the micro. So the macro is that this will simply flush through the system because the shaky relationships will come out early, and they will just collapse, and then you'll just move on. And the police and the government respond to this, and they make it very clear that those rules of lockdown do not apply to partners who feel at risk. But yes, of course, for instance, Christmas is the highest rate of divorces and violence because you're forced to look at someone that you don't particularly like for the first time in a long time sometimes. And murder usually occurs to a family member, especially if alcohol is involved. So the macro is it will flush through quite quickly, and you'll be left with the average person simply working on their relationship. The micro is that if you really decide that someone is a risk to you, leave quickly and seek appropriate support. Don't think that you're trapped in lockdown. You're not. Do not allow there to be any risk to your personal safety or those who are dependent on you. There is no need for that to happen.
Because
so that's the micro.
Because I just wanted to sort of just go a little bit deeper in that, because the thing is, you're talking about alcohol in creatures, which actually doesn't, people think it actually makes you feel better, and it does give you a dopamine boost, but it also enhances the mood that you're actually in. So if you're going through, particularly this sort of stage, because mentally you must be, most people are going through a great level of frustration, anxiety, and stress, and you take it out on the people closest to you, I suppose.
Well, the the great thing is affordability. What they found with alcohol and cigarettes and drugs generally is that affordability is a major factor in usage. And therefore, with the economic crisis and people worried about money, there will be, of course, the spike of drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, and so on. But then that's going to rapidly drop because people are suffering from serious economic anxiety. And again, of course, with illicit drugs like cocaine and cannabis, because of disruptions in the supply chain, then the prices are going up as well. So people are likely to start using that even less.
Yeah, and actually what was really interesting, sorry, I just wanted to add to that. What was really interesting is that the police have actually said, and I don't know why they said it, I don't know why you actually make something like that public, because it just gives people the heads up in some ways. But it was, the police found that drug dealers were easier to spot during this lockdown, which means they were able to catch them. As I said, why you'd want to actually disclose that level of intelligence? Because now it just ruins the whole plot, doesn't it?
Well, they're also easier to catch because they stay at home. So they because you see, one of the problems police have is they don't have the resources to simply keep on turning up to a suspected perpetrator's address. So often what you'll hear is, well, we went to arrest them, but they weren't at home. So they have to depend on being at home. So on a serious point, though, there is a potential that self-isolation and lockdown is going to make coronavirus worse. And the lesson comes from the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. Now, that caught the end of the First World War. And soldiers, the Spanish flu ran rampant throughout the trenches. And soldiers who were mildly affected with a relatively mild strain simply stayed in the trenches and rode it out until they got better. Soldiers who were very seriously affected with a more severe strain were taken to the military hospitals. And from there, of course, the infection spread because you can't really use personal protective equipment to protect yourself against the flu. You just can't. And therefore, this is an example of population selection for more serious strains, for more severe strains. Because the thing is, everything is constantly mutating. And it's why, for instance, you need to follow a full course of antibiotics for a bacterial infection. Because if you don't, then the slightly more resistant parts of the population of the bug that you don't kill will stay and will be more likely to kill you and will be more resistant to antibiotic in future.
Actually, let me
and
just
what's
jump.
happening now?
Go on. I just want to jump in on that one a second, actually, because you talk about antibiotics, and as you know, I mean, I'm not a great lover of taking pharmaceutical medication, to be honest. I mean, because I believe they're in the business of actually, they make money from you being ill rather than you being better, so they don't want you to be fully better, do they? Because otherwise they lose they lose their profit margin. But one of the things about antibiotics that I wanted to talk about was, if people are very reliant on them when you've got an infection to actually cure it. But what happens when what happens when you take antibiotics too often? Do you not become immune to it after a while? And they just don't work, because if you're just going to take antibiotics every single time you've got a little sniffle or whatever, it's going to screw up your immune system, is it not?
Very good point. Well, there's you mentioned two factors there. The first is that you don't get immune to antibiotics. The bacteria gets immune to antibiotics. So if you keep on blasting yourself with antibiotics, then the bacteria has more of a chance to mutate. Secondly, in most cases, you don't even need the antibiotic because most infections are viral and viruses don't respond to antibiotics. Thirdly, antibiotics because they kill bacteria, they also kill the normal healthy bacteria in your gut. And the healthy bacteria in your gut are a main determinant of your immune response and mood and levels of inflammation in the body. So, in fact, antibiotics can be very bad for you.
Should it be
So
just so? It should be just a last resort, shouldn't it?
absolutely right, a last resort. Yes, when you need them, you need them, but in a lot of cases, you don't need them. So going back to self-isolation and lockdown. So because don't forget that in normal flu, people don't self-isolate. You know, they walk around, they infect each other merrily, and what happens is the more serious infections uh, kill people, and the less serious infections, the people are more mobile. They keep on infecting each other. So what you're left with is the less serious strain of whatever flu you've got, and it simply fizzles out. Now, what's happening is people are told to self-isolate. So you're getting the trench warfare phenomenon, whereby the only the more severe cases are left going to hospital, and that's why we hear so many incidents of, well, so and so went to hospital, caught corona, and died, because that's where you've got the more serious strains of corona left.
Yeah, but they're
So
putting
that's
everyone in the same. They're putting everyone in the same bundle, and I think I mentioned this last week. I mean, Eddie Large, who was one of the Little and Large show, the two comedians. I mean, he died during this period, and I think it's been attributed to coronavirus. But the thing is, this is a guy who had actually had heart disease most of his life, and he went into a hospital. It's almost like Eddie Large. The media sort of stated it. Eddie Large has died having tested positive for coronavirus. So he didn't necessarily die of coronavirus, but he's been put into that category. It's almost as though the more people they can put into the coronavirus box, the more they can actually justify actually having the lockdown the way it is.
yes, but there's also a serious possibility that that is a lie, because uh, to test for coronavirus is quite difficult. So to just give you a statistic, the one of the problems with assessing mortality rate at the moment is that the statistics are meaningless, because so far most corona testing has been done in inpatients and hospital. In other words, you've got to be pretty ill before you're tested. Secondly, only not only do you have to be in hospital, you have to be oxygen desaturating. In other words, on death's door, suffering from adult respiratory distress syndrome before you're tested. Thirdly, to test it properly, you have to swab right at the back of the throat and stick a swab up the nose to the back of the larynx. So it's pretty difficult, and therefore people don't test it. The diagnosis is made on clinical grounds. In other words, oh, you probably have coronavirus. So, of course, we weren't there. We don't know the truth. But I think there's a high index of suspicion that poor old Eddie Large wasn't officially tested. I mean, who would with a with a fat, very ill patient? They're not going to start swabbing the back of his throat. They probably clinically diagnosed him, and the press mislabeled that and said he tested positive.
Is there a? I mean, do you think there's a reason why? Actually, I had a better. I was I was able to articulate the question better in my head. Is there a? It's all right. It's actually gone, but I'm just wondering, to put this amount of fear into people regarding this coronavirus, and I know it's actually quite a bad strain and everything. Is there another? Is there a? Do you think there's another reason why they actually want to put fear into people? Because it is creating fear, getting people to be more submissive to the system. Um, I mean, that's how I see it in some ways. Is there a reason behind all that? Because let's face it. I
Yeah,
mean,
of course,
you look
it's
at
compliance.
you look at it is because you look at some people who've spent years and years building their companies and sacrificed a lot to provide, to build their companies up, are literally dead and buried.
The main the main drive to behavior is reflex anxiety reduction. And remember, reflex equals no conscious thought. And nature created us that way because that's the quickest way of surviving as a caveman. You see a saber-toothed tiger, you don't think, you go. And that's why when governments need to boost their popularity ratings, they manufacture